Welcome to this week's edition of the Casual Shooters Podcast, your premier podcast for the casual shooter. Our guest today is a resident of the Blue Grass State and a production grandmaster. Why don't you join me in welcoming to the show, Brennan Decker. How you doing, Brennan?
Doing all right. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
If you would, go ahead and take a second and introduce yourself.
So my name is Brennan Decker. I'm from Kentucky. I'm a production grandmaster. I shoot mostly state level matches. Occasionally I'll visit an area match or shoot nationals.
Now, you visited nationals last year.
I did. It was a fairly successful year for me, I would consider it. Placed ninth. So that match went a lot better than I expected it to.
Yeah, I would say ninth is very successful, but we'll get there.
Oh, yeah.
So what I like to do, Brennan, is ambush people right up front with the hardest questions and start the podcast off as difficult as possible. Then the rest of it's easy game. Easy day. All right, you ready?
All right.
All right, hard question number one. What's your favorite movie?
I'm going to be very basic with this. The first John Wick, not the rest of them.
Oh, okay. All right. Did the other ones not meet the same standard as the first?
That is my belief. I think they set the bar really high with the first one, and it's like they tried to exceed it and tried a little too hard with the rest of them.
Have you seen 4?
I have.
Okay. So have I. Now, my thought is, I thought 2 was pretty close to 1. There was dialogue, there was story. 3 got a little bit less of that and more just action. And then 4 was almost just, let's see how many people we can kill in a 2-hour movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, how much action can we pack into this?
Literally, yeah, we're not even going to let John Wick talk. He's just going to kill people and get thrown downstairs.
Yes, exactly.
And hit by cars, yep.
Yeah, they went a little too far.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more story and dialogue and some other stuff, but it was still a John Wick movie, so I was okay with seeing it on a big screen.
For sure, for sure.
All right, now, question number 2. The preface of this is, I have found doing this podcast that people don't read as much as they used to. If you read, what's your favorite book?
I think my favorite book is still yet Relentless by Tim Grover.
It's what, Relentless?
Relentless by Tim Grover.
Okay, what's that about?
So Tim Grover was the coach for like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant. The book is I think it's more about the mental aspects of any sort of competition than anything. I like Ben Steger's book, Match Mentality. I like that as well. I'll revert back to that one pretty often. It's a toss-up between Match Mentality and Relentless. I've read Tim Grover's book Winning as well. It's good, but I still like Relentless better.
So who do you think of all athletes in history, who do you think had the greatest mental game?
I don't follow sports very well, so
well, Brennan, we can't be friends now.
I'm very specialized when it comes to shooting. Is the only sport that I have shown interest in.
Okay. All right, shooting. Who do you think has the greatest match mentality? I have an answer. You want me to give you mine?
Sure.
Eric Greffel.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I wouldn't argue that at all.
I mean, if you just base the streak of world titles that he has, there's no bigger stage than that.
Yeah.
and nobody. I don't know how long it's been since he's been beat at a world match. His consistency is unlike anybody else, and that's all that mental game.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Uh, I really enjoy watching Max and Nils as well, with you know the way that they present themselves during a match and stuff. Uh, but yeah, I can't argue that about Eric at all, which I don't think anyone can.
Yeah, and I would say second to him, I would put Rob Latham because of total number of. I counted USPSA titles at 29. So Nils has 17, and he's number 2.
Yeah,
So, I mean, there are plenty of people to choose from. You know, you could throw Ben Steger in the conversation because he had, what, 8 production titles in a row?
yeah,
Not counting the years that Eric Graffel won it. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
Eric even beat Ben, and that was during Ben's time. So Eric is just a different dude when it comes to mentality.
for sure.
Now,
For
sports
sure.
wise, I'm going to say the great Michael Jordan. And while I consider Michael Jordan the GOAT, because nobody, look, you have Wilt Chamberlain, you have some other great players in basketball. Absolutely phenomenal. Bill Russell won 11 titles. But we're talking Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell were 7-footers. Michael Jordan was 6'6". He was a point guard or a shooting guard, whatever you want to call him. But he dominated the game. He literally dominated the game. He dunked on 7-footers. He rebounded. He stole. He played defense. He played the entire court from end to end line. But not only that, he made the people around him better. I would say that he didn't necessarily always have the greatest of teams or supporting cast, but even in his first 3 to 4 years, when they were all considered users of a fantastic white powder substance, that he still brought that team up. So mental game, Michael Jordan, hands down, bar none, because it didn't matter if he was playing international, an NBA Finals, or just a regular season game. That dude was there. Every game he played the same with the same intensity. Crazy. So there we go. I have you on to talk, and I'm doing all the talking.
Hey, I'm getting education here.
This is all kinds of backwards. We gotta right this ship. All right. If you're into superheroes, I am not. But if you are, who's your favorite superhero or historical figure? I told you these were the hard questions right up front.
Yeah, these are definitely the hard questions here. Oh, man, you're giving me some to chew on here.
I'm waiting for the Biden administration. We're going to have to circle back to this.
Yeah, we're going to. Yeah, no. Well, I don't have a teleprompter, so.
Well, even with the teleprompter, they have no answers.
Yeah, true. Oh, Lord. Picking historical figures could get very controversial very quickly.
It could.
Let's see here. Been watching Marvel movies all my life, so we'll go basic and say like Captain America or something like that. Yeah.
Can't go wrong with Captain America.
Oh, no.
You can't.
Can't. Just, no, it's impossible.
Yeah, I mean, he has the best best costume, uniform, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, check yours out.
Exactly.
Yes, sir. I like it.
I even have matching in the background.
Hell yeah.
All right. Here's an easier, tough question for you. Favorite gun and caliber, and they don't, just because you're a production guy, your production gun could be your favorite gun of all time, but it doesn't have to necessarily be that caliber. It could be 22.
I still enjoy shooting 1911 and 45.
Okay. Favorite gun and caliber then?
Yep, for sure.
All right. So I assume you own one then?
So I sold mine to get a Tanfolio. It was one of those sacrifices to upgrading platforms, and I sold it. Oh yes, yep,
Yeah.
sweet. And I'm working at a gun store right now, and we had a Colt come in. It's just one of the Colt 1991s. It's like 80 series, kind of bottom of the barrel Colt, but I seen it come in. I was like, yeah, I'll be snagging that. Threw it on layaway. I'm like, I'll be taking that one home eventually.
There you go. I like
Oh
it. I'm going to slide that one away for me.
yeah,
Smart.
yeah,
So, all right. You say you work at a gun store?
yes, sir.
All right. So the last tough question I like to have is tailored to the guest. So I'm going to ask you, of all the guns you've seen come into that store and leave, what has been your favorite? Like the neatest looking gun, like you're like, wow, that's a wow gun. I need some Jeopardy music in the background. I'm
Yeah,
going to
for
download
sure.
Jeopardy music.
We had a MP5 Navy come in. It
Ooh.
was full auto with a Knight's Armament can. Yeah, that one came in. It went straight to Gunbroker, but it was sweet. Between that one and the STG 44,
Oh, I
those two
think you have
were
a
really
picture of
nice.
that on your Instagram, don't you?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Yep. I saw that. Okay.
yeah.
Did
Customer
you enjoy
came in
shooting
with it.
that?
I did. That was pretty sweet. Of course, I was leaning into it because I'm like, okay, this thing's probably going to recoil similar to an AK, and I was expecting the fire rate to be close to it, but it was extremely manageable.
Really? I would have
Yeah,
expected more recoil as well.
yeah.
Very interesting. Okay. Now, did you get a chance to shoot the MP5?
Not that one specifically. We had someone else come in. They had just the a full auto receiver for an MP5, and they put it on a AP5,
Okay.
and we played around with that one a little bit. But I was
How'd you
shooting.
like that?
It was pretty sweet. I like it pretty well. I've shot it and an Uzi in full auto. The Uzi's fun. MP5 is still my favorite of the two.
It's the gold standard for submachine guns. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
First time I shot an MP5, we were shooting him at 100 yards, okay? So here I am standing at the 100-yard line. I'm leaning into it, and I'm aiming, and I'm like, all right, this thing's going to drop. So I aim high. I'm like, I'm like, all right. I go and look at my target. All my group's up high. So I'm like, wait a minute, what? So I aim center. It's like, center. I was like, who knew? I would have expected it more drop than I had, but those things are awesome.
Yes. I love them. The fire rate on it is perfect to control it.
Yeah. When we had an HK rep come out, and we got to shoot the HK PDW, HK5 PDW. So the personal defense weapon that sits in like a briefcase. Man, those submachine guns that HK makes are some of the funnest things ever. All right.
Yeah.
So we got all the tough questions out of the way. So when were you first introduced to a firearm?
Let's see here.
Have you always lived in Kentucky?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. My
So
family's been hunting. So,
okay.
I mean, like, as soon as I could remember, guns were around. But as far as me actually showing interest in them and, like, hey, I want to shoot, I think that wasn't until I was about 10 or 11. I didn't like guns at first because I was afraid of the noise and didn't want to deal with the recoil or anything at first.
Right.
I'd shoot BB guns and stuff. And then finally they got me around to shooting 22s. Then I wanted a pistol and finally started shooting a 22 pistol when I was 12 or 13. And it kind of started going downhill to this point from there.
That seems to be what happens. Once you get bit by that bug, it just never goes away. It just gets
Yep,
worse.
it really does.
So
And it
what was
never ends.
No, it doesn't. It's ridiculous. So what was the first gun you've owned?
It was a 22 Cricket.
A 22 Cricket.
Yep.
All right. So what is a 22 Cricket? I'm not even familiar with that.
It's one of the youth single shot 22s. Working with the bolt, put one round in it, close the bolt.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'm looking at them now. Okay, and it's called. I guess it's a youth 22 gun.
Yep. Accurate as
Okay.
hell.
Oh, I believe it. Man, I bought my oldest son will be 23 this year, and when he was, I think 10, 9 or 10, whatever it was, for Christmas I bought him a 17 caliber rifle. Man, that thing is a tack hammer. It's just pow, 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 pow. It is amazing. He's actually taken quite a few rabbits and squirrels with that thing. It's very impressive. And I ran the ballistics out to 150 yards, comparing it to the 22 rifle. And after about 75 to 100 yards, it just far exceeds what that 22 can do. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, 22 bolt action rifle would, especially as a kid, man, that would be fun as all get out.
Oh yeah, going out with like the 100 round packs or even the 500 round packs of 22, and it's like, of course, I live out in the middle of nowhere, so I go out back and I'm like, all right, how many rocks can I shoot today? You know, you're loading up little rounds of 22. Then you get bored and start taking the casings and throwing them down. Now it's only like 10 yards away. I'm seeing, can I hit that? That sort of thing.
Yeah, of course. And then that just leads to more and more. And yeah, it's just one big snowball.
Oh yeah, and then about that time that I started getting into guns, the show Top Shots was really big on. I think it was the History Channel. Started
Yep.
watching that, and became fascinated with that. So that once again has led us to this point.
So, how did you find competition then?
So I was aware that there was competition for a long time. I didn't know anything about getting into them. So I'd been seeing guys like JJ Racaza, Shane Coley, Max Michelle on TV and everything, but didn't know how to get into it until I acquired a 1911. Wanted to get a front sight put onto it, so I went to a local gunsmith, and he was fitting the front sight onto it. And there was a CZ Tac Sport sitting in the corner. Well, I'd never seen anything like it before. All I'm seeing is this gun with a big old mag well on it and funny looking gun. I said, what is that? And it's sitting in a, I think it was one of the Safari Land holsters, the race rigs. I said, what is that? What kind of holster is that? He starts going on a tangent about USPSA and competitive shooting. And I'm 15 at the time. And I said, that's really cool. I says, that's something that happens here locally? He's like, yeah. He said, we shoot outlaw matches as well if you want to shoot one. I said, yeah, I'd love to shoot one. Well, I didn't have enough 45 ammo to shoot the match with the 1911, but I had a decent amount of 9mm sitting back and a Glock 17 that we just weren't doing anything with. And that ended up with me going to my first outlaw match with a Glock 17. Hated Glock at the time, but didn't have anything else to shoot. After that, I was trying to shoot every weekend. And
So at 15, you got the bug.
oh yeah. And I ended up shooting Glock all the way up until I started shooting the Tanfolios. And after that, here we are.
All right. So, all right, I'm going to backtrack to what you just talked about in a minute. But at what age did you get the Tanfolio?
I didn't get the Tanfolio until August of 21, I think, 2021. So I was 19 at the time. Right. My math is horrible, apparently.
So
Yeah,
about
I was
4
19.
years you shot the Glock.
Yep.
Okay. Now, what was it about? You said you didn't like Glocks at the time. So what was it about the Glock? And this is not a bash on Glocks, but just curious because I'm not a fan of it, but I don't like the ergonomics.
It was the ergonomics, the way it felt in my hand. Uh, didn't like the angle. I didn't like the triggers. Um, the one I had that I shot my first match with had the Trigicon HD night sights, so
Okay.
I didn't have to deal with the factory Glock sights at the time. Uh, there just wasn't a lot I liked about it. I didn't like polymer frames. Didn't like the plastic. Didn't like anything about it. And then after I started shooting them, I could shoot them fairly well, and they just ran. And
Yeah.
so I ended up getting a Glock 17, no, the 17L, and of course it's got the 6-inch long barrel, and
Yeah.
I had it in a Safari, not Safari, on the Blackhawk holsters, like the Serpas, and so you had this much barrel hanging at the bottom of the holster, but I mean it had a Zev trigger in it, Bob Vogel sights,
Oh,
13-pound
okay.
recoil spring, and big old magwell, and I shot that thing forever. But it fixed the issue that I had with the trigger. So I was like, hey, I like this gun. I didn't understand at the time that I could have just went and bought a Zev trigger and installed it because I couldn't work on Glocks at the time. So I just ran across this pistol. I was like, I want that. Save up my money to buy it. And yeah, that it was still fun to shoot a 17L for a while. And then it became cooler later on to say, hey, I have a 17L and no one else around here has one. But
It's in case you need to sword fight too.
pretty much, yeah, it's huge.
Right. Any plans on putting an optic on that thing?
Uh, I ended up selling that as well to get another one of
Okay.
these. Uh, but I ended up with a Glock 24 to replace it. Um, uh, if I shoot anything as far as limited optics goes, mm, I'd probably go all the way. I'd either get a limited master and put a dot on it or go all the way to a 2011. Not sure I'll dab around in that division though. We'll see what happens in the future. Might pick up an open gun again before I play in limited optics.
Okay. Now, how I've heard that the Tanfos can be finicky at times and can require some maintenance to keep running. How do you like yours so far, and how's it held up for you?
So they've been holding up really well. As far as the reliability goes, once you figure out how it needs to be set up, like the correct spring weight, another thing I've figured out is the extractor springs on them. Like one of these guns, I have to put a extra power extractor spring in it to get it to run the way I want it to constantly. Um, Not that anything was wrong with the stock one. I'm just really lazy when it comes to pecking the crimp roll pin out and cleaning the extractor and putting it back in because
Okay.
I don't like dealing with crimp roll pins. Uh, one of them, that's the way it runs the best. The other one, there's something different in the tolerances. As soon as you put a extra power extractor spring in it, you start running into issues. There's too much tension on the extractor, and whenever you load it, you feel a hitch as the round is being loaded and the rim of the casing is going into the extractor. With the Patriot Defense one, it will still run, but it's a little, for unloaded starts, it can be really fun because if you don't send it home just right, you're going to be jammed up there for a bit trying to
Oh
clear a
no.
malfunction.
Okay.
With the Wolf extra power extractor spring, can't load it.
Wow.
Yep. I'm sitting there like trying to smack it home and it just doesn't want to budge. So I have to put the stock extractor spring in that one and just clean the extractor a little bit more often. I found that with the Patriot Defense sledgehammers, I can get away with a 13-pound hammer spring with CCI primers if they're seated deep enough. And of course, it'll run Federals all day, every day. But I prefer running a 14 or 15.5-pound hammer spring just to ensure if I'm working at the range or something, someone wants to shoot it, slap any ammo that they've got in it and shoot it without any issues. or if I'm having to run Gen X primers or whatever it might be, I just get a little bit better reliability out of 14 or 15 half-pound hammer spring. It's better
Okay.
just to not have to worry about it and deal with a little bit more of a double action pull.
So it's kind of like, so your Tanfo is kind of like just an open gun then. You just have to figure out what springs work best, and then you're good to go.
Yep, and then you just leave it. And as far as cleaning it goes, I clean mine about whenever the trigger return spring breaks, which is right around 6,000 rounds. And
Okay.
occasionally I'll take the slide off of it and look at it, and if I'm like, okay, that's pretty nasty, I'll just take brake cleaner, spray it, scrub it a little bit, throw oil back on it, and put it back together.
Now, is your trigger spring going to break at 6,000 rounds regardless of how often you clean it?
It's more dependent on how often you dry fire it than anything is been my experience with it. So I know guys that have never broken a trigger return spring in the Tanfolio, right?
So you know they don't dry fire then.
Yeah, because I've broken two. Yeah, I've broken two of them. One of them was not on my gun. I was borrowing a gun, and I text the guy. I said, I just broke a trigger return spring. I'm at the warm-up bay at Nationals for Carry Optics Nationals. I said, I just broke a trigger return spring. I'm going to a backup gun. He goes, how? I've never broken one. I'm like, I just did. Of course, he's like, I've been shooting Tanfolio since, 2014. I've never broken a trigger return spring. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, man. I just broke one. I was like, so if you haven't spoke to anyone that has broke one before, man, I just did in your gun.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I've seen where other people that are shooting Tanfolios, they have the same experience. Around 6,000 rounds of breaking trigger return springs. So what I started doing is I just replace the trigger return spring occasionally. I mean, it's $8 to ensure that I don't break a spring in the middle of a match.
Yeah, well worth the cost.
Yeah,
Yeah, I get
for
it.
sure.
And that's the funny thing, because to me, the more you shoot a gun, the more you know about it, and you find out those little things. And you're like, that doesn't mean the gun's unreliable. You just know that there's a service life to a certain spring or a certain part. And if you know that, if you shoot it enough to know that, it's like, okay, it's about 5,000 rounds. Let me just go ahead and swap it out, and I'll be good to go for another 5,000 rounds. So
Exactly.
yeah, not hard.
The only thing that I've got to say has kind of annoyed me about these, and it's not necessarily the gun, it's more the part. I like the Dawson front sights. The way the set screw for the Dawson fronts work on these guns, it's not setting in the correct location, and it's a little bitty set screw. And I don't know if it's just the fitment and the dovetail or what, but getting them to stay on the gun can be a little bit of an issue. One of the guns, it's not a problem at all. I mean, I cram red Loctite in the dovetail, smack it in there with a hammer, good to go after it cures. That one hasn't moved at all. The other one, I was in the middle of a practice session, I look at it, and it is like hanging off the front of the gun by about that much. Well, that's not good. So cram it full of red Loctite again, smack it back into place, because it would not come off. Like, I'm sitting there with a hammer trying to beat it off the gun. It's like, nah, we ain't going any further. So not coming all the way off, but doesn't want to stay on. Smack it again with a hammer and red Loctite. Practice session later, it's coming off again. Cram
Wow.
full of red Loctite again, smack it back in with a hammer, take a spring-loaded punch, dimple it in 4 spots, and put a line of Loctite around that as well. Let it cure. So far, it's held on. How long that'll last? Don't know. If it comes off again, I'm just going to mill the slide off, put a SRO on it, and buy another slide.
There you go. I like that. That's a good plan.
It is. It is. Like, if the front dovetail's not going to work with me, let's make the sights useless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's not when you're shooting production and it's iron sights. You definitely need the front and the back.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes it's a suggestion, sometimes,
Right.
but most of the time you need them.
Yeah. You know, you might get away with it at that 3, maybe even 5 yard target, but beyond that, I think you definitely for sure want some a set of sights, not just one or the other.
Yeah, yeah. In most cases, yeah.
So you've been shooting the Tanfo now, what, about 4 years then?
No, 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 no. I've been shooting tanfold about a year and a half now.
Oh, okay.
Uh, yeah, August of 21. I shot
Okay.
2021 Kentucky State. I shot it with the Glock, and that was the last major match I shot with the Glock. After that, I was trying out some Tanfolios. I experimented with several different guns, but the Tanfolio is what I ended up going with. And right before Area 5, I got the Tanfolio.
How do you like the weight on that thing?
I like it pretty well. I still occasionally I'll pick up a Glock and I'm like, just feels right in the hand to me still yet, which is really weird because I went from I hate the way a Glock feels in my hand to this feels like home. Uh, but in the end, after I start practicing with the Tanfolio, like if I take an off, a few months off and then pick up the Tanfolio and start shooting it again, it feels fine. Uh, the recoil impulse is really soft, doesn't really lift very much. Um,
Now, what are you shooting, factory ammo or hand loads?
Hand loads.
So
Yep.
your power factor, I'm guessing, is 130, 132 ish,
Uh,
or
just shot Blue Grass LOCAP and I chronoed at 135.
okay, all right,
Yep. So typically, if I'm anywhere between 130 and 135, I'm okay with that. Like if we chrono it and it's somewhere in that range, I'm just going to set the loader and start loading ammo because feeling the difference in 5 power factor with a gun that weighs 48 ounces,
right. You're not going to notice.
yeah, you're chasing too many factors there. I'd just rather set it, forget it, and keep loading.
Yeah, I feel like you could do plus P ammo in there and feel okay with it. You know.
If you have the right recoil spring, yes. I was working with a guy out on my range one time, and he wanted me to demo a drill. I said, okay. And I was like, I gotta go back to back to the house to grab some ammo, which our range is in the backyard, so that wasn't an issue. But he said, no, man, here, just grab some of my ammo. And he had the Winchester M1152. I loaded it into my mag. I go to shoot a build drill with it, and the first round goes off, and I'm like, okay, I'm shooting some ammo now. That is for sure. I mean, that stuff chronos at like 155 power factor plus. So it's like, boom. That's different. It'd take a
Wow.
little bit of shooting to time that stuff. Yeah, that stuff is a little warm. A little warm. But I'm sure
I
if you had a heavy recoil spring in the Tanto, it wouldn't bother you too much.
right absorb some of that recoil on the slide there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
of course, I run an 8 pound recoil spring in both of these. So it's like, I'm a little
That's
light
very light.
whenever it comes to it. Yeah.
And they function just fine with an 8 pounder, huh?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
the only time I had an issue with it was in the gun that I have to make sure it's a factory extractor spring in it because whenever I was running the extra power one, I had to run a 9 pound recoil spring to make sure it had enough energy to pull the gun back into battery with the extra tension on that rim of the casing.
How long did it take you with these guns to figure all of that out? Like all the spring
Um,
setup.
so as far as the spring setups go, I'm still kind of figuring that out a little bit. I think the 8 pound recoil springs work great. I've thought about asking questions to people that shoot Tanfolios, have been shooting them longer than me. I thought about asking them about how they, spring their guns, why they spring them that way. But I already knew someone that shot Tanfolios, and he just said, you know, 8 pound recoil springs while I run all my guns, but he's shooting stock twos. I'm shooting stock masters. So it's like, there could be a better recoil spring combination out there, but this is just what works. So I've kind of like stuck with it. As far as working on the gun in general, get out the good old YouTube, watching Memphis Mechanic tearing apart a Tanfolio. Within a month, I was working on them decently well. It constantly learning new stuff about them. Right now, I think I have a pretty good handle on it, but I could be wrong, and I could be proved wrong really quickly. So I try not to get too overconfident about it. Yeah.
Okay. Now, do they have a like Glock has their own Glock Armorers class? Does Tanfo have anything like that?
Not that I know of. They could. It could be a thing. If it is, I don't know anything about it. So far, the only thing I know is go to YouTube. Hey, that guy knows how to work on it. That's how I learned to work on these. And you can find a lot of stuff on YouTube. That's how I originally learned how do I grip a gun? Oh, there's Shane Coley showing how he grips a Glock. I'm going to watch that. So
That would make sense. Yep.
that's how I've learned.
Or Bob Vogel, either
Yes.
one.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean,
watch
that's
both
how
of those guys.
Yeah, I mean that's how I learned how to work on anything on my car, any type of house improvement. Okay, let me go on YouTube and watch a few videos and then figure it all out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's all kinds of information on there.
There is.
Yeah.
So that's for sure. That's one of the benefits to the internet.
Yeah.
Now, at what point did you decide you were going to get serious about shooting? Was it about the time you decided to buy the Tanfo, or?
I would say it was late 2019, maybe into early 2020. My shooting mentor is the same guy that has been shooting Tanfolios forever. His name's Rick Van Blaricum. And
Did you just say Rip Van Winkle?
Van Blaricum. Van Blaricum.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, the last name, a lot of people mess up the last name. I probably messed it up a lot. So
I'm sure I would.
Oh yeah, ROs do it all the time. And if he goes into a restaurant, he'll just tell them Van, not Van Blaricum, Van.
There you
I'm
go.
like, I get it now. But he let me borrow a Glock 35 from Zev, but it was the KC Asabio model. He let me borrow it to shoot a local match and then let me shoot a classifier match with it. And I shot limited 10 at the classifier match and made master at the classifier match. Well, that was just cool to me because in our little shooting group, I was the first one to make master and I just did it sporadically. I was like, man, that's really cool. He's like, maybe you need to be shooting more. I'm like, maybe I should. Because like, if I can make master, can I make grandmaster? Well, now that's a question I want to know the answer to. So he ended up convincing me to start shooting major matches and start actually practicing more often. Got me started on the correct drills, or correct drills at the time, I would say. Now it's still yet like I pull those drills out, go back to them right before a major match to be like, okay, let's get myself back on the gun the way I need to be. But I would say that's whenever I really got serious about it, because it started off with I want to make grandmaster, and then after you make grandmaster, it's like, okay, I really need to be shooting GM scores in major matches, and need to be winning them at the least, because otherwise it's like, now I don't feel like I'm actually a grandmaster because I just shot 80% of another production GM. It's like, okay, but then whenever the other GM is like Niels or Jacob Hetherington, it makes you feel a little bit better.
Yeah, that they shouldn't count. You should just take them off.
Pretty much.
There,
It's like,
there,
oh my
there
God.
literally does. I feel like they need to do USPSA needs to kind of follow IDPA's path here in that they created a distinguished GM. I kind of feel like those guys need to be in that different category because once you've won a national championship, you've proven you're at a different level.
Yeah, I think
And-
some of them would definitely qualify for that. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
Area 5 last year, I was looking at the percentage I shot of Jacob Hetherington, and I'm like, how did I only shoot 75% of him at this match? Granted, it wasn't the best match I'd shot in my life, but I didn't think it was that bad. And I get to looking at the overall scores, and I'm like, how is he 1% off Max Michelle while shooting production? I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like that was just fascinating.
You start breaking down those statistics like that and comparing them. You're like, how are these guys doing this? I don't. I mean, is he just pointing the gun at the target? How is he? I don't get it.
I so I talked to him a little bit. Their practice sessions are insanely hard from what I gather. It's like,
Oh,
shooting they're probably shooting plate racks at 35 and 40 yards on a regular basis. Probably God knows what they're doing. Whatever they're doing though, apparently it works.
well,
Uh,
I mean, all the free unlimited ammo. You
yeah.
know that U.S. Army marksmanship unit. Man, they have. I was on the Marine Corps rifle team, and even back then, that was 1990. I mean, the AMU even back then had the top stuff. So they I don't want to say they get handed stuff, but they literally get recruited to come and do that, and that's their job. So those guys are. Anytime I see he was on AMU, I'm like, okay, well, I know what his skill level is because that was his full time job.
Yep. It's like, okay, that guy can shoot.
Yeah, legit, that guy can shoot.
Yep. And
So
it's no joke. And I think it's interesting. Of course, like I said, I work at the gun store. We have a gun range and everything. I come back from a match like that, and they're like, "Did you win?" I'm like, "I was shooting against Jacob Hetherington from the Army Marksmanship Unit. Of course, I didn't win." They're like, "Oh, come on, man. Why not?" And I'm like, "Are you going to give me free ammo?" I was like,
for a year
"Cause
to get ready.
yeah." I was like, let me see here. I guess you don't understand exactly how good Hetherington is. That's okay.
Yeah, and let's qualify that even more. Are you going to pay me a full time salary to go and just and the ammo and just let me go to the range and practice all day every day, and then teach it too, so I can reinforce what my basics are, and then practice some more.
Yeah. Now I've heard from like some guys up here in Fort Knox that are with the marketing team and stuff like that. That I mean, they're still doing their normal MOS, like still doing their job, but like 3 or 4 weeks before a major match, or occasionally they're like, "Hey, let's go do what we need to do to be ready for this match coming up." I've heard that as well. Of course, I'm not in that community, so who knows what goes on in Fort Benning for those guys. But once again,
Right.
whatever it is, they're eating their Wheaties every morning, apparently.
They definitely have it down to a science.
Yeah,
So
for
good
sure.
for those guys. So yeah, you can't. I mean, even Max Michel, that's where he came from. So you can't really compare yourself to those guys until you, I guess, you get to that point. But coming up, it's nice to see, I guess, the improvement each year getting closer and closer and closer.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's the thing that I watch is like my first major match is like, okay, what percentage did I shoot of this guy, whoever it might be? And it's like, okay, so I was like my first state match. I'll use that as an example. My first major match was Bell in the Bluegrass, and I shot on a junior slot. Never shot production before. Went and shot the match, so I don't even count that as a statistic half the time. But let's say Kentucky State 2020. That was my first major match that I'd actually practiced for, understood what I was getting into. It's like, okay, so if I was 14% behind the guy who won that match, where am I at now? And each year I would look at that. But you also have to take into account that they're probably training and getting better as well. I mean, I don't think anyone, of course, I'm sure at a certain point that everyone just like plateaus, but try to take into consideration, okay, have they gotten better as well? because sometimes like, okay, that gap is not closing. What's going on here? Uh, I think shooting against like Sal Luna is a good example of that. It's like, okay, I've shot against him in all these matches and the gap is not closing. It's like, what is he doing different, or what am I not doing well enough? Uh,
And
Occasionally,
see,
that's a question you got to ask yourself.
and that's where I wonder if taking a class gives you that breakthrough moment and allows you to move to that next step, you know?
Yeah, and I think I took Ben Stager's skills and drills class in
Okay.
September of 2020, and that class there was things I took away from it that was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And now I'll be shooting matches and I'll draw back on that information. The big thing that I took away from it was picking spots on targets. That kind of like reinforced it whenever I took his class, shooting more target focused with irons opposed to every target focusing on my iron sights and staying drawn into the sights. Whenever I actually pick a spot on the target to drive the gun to, I find myself shooting better points. Uh, and actually putting the gun in the center of the target instead of pressing the trigger whenever the gun starts crossing brown. So it's like, instead of jerking the gun over to the target, pressing two as fast as I can at it, I'm actually going, yep, that's where it needs to be. Press two. I mean, I don't think it's so much slower that it costs you anything, because like Saturday would be a good example with the LOCAP match. There were stages where you can watch on the videos that I still need to post. I'm lazy. Where like I swing the gun around a corner and there's a target right there at like 5 yards. And there's a slight pause on me engaging it because whenever I jerk the gun over to it, I'm in the C zone. Well, there's a target right in front of me at 3 or 4 yards. Why not just drag the gun just a little bit further and shoot 2 alpha on it, pick my points where they're really easy to get out of that position. So that was something I really took away from the class. Paying attention to the 10. Yeah, that's a tongue twister there. Paying more attention to the tension in my firing hand and actually relaxing it a bit. There was a stage at Nationals last year where I think it was stage 18. It was at the very top in zone 3 on the end.
Yep.
There was 11 pieces of steel that you could take from one position.
Yes.
And it's like, I have 11 rounds in the gun. If I want to shoot this stage well, I have to shoot those 11 pieces of steel with 11 rounds in the gun. It's like, if I can do that, I can pull ahead on this stage a little bit. Granted, I'm not going to win the stage. I pretty much accept that whenever I'm shooting the Nationals. It's like, I'm not trying to win every stage. I'm just trying to shoot. How well can I shoot without hanging myself on each stage?
Yeah.
So it's like, I get into that position, I'm paying attention to, am I pressing the trigger straight back? Ideally, you don't want to be thinking about this on the clock, but it was one of those times where I kind of just take a breath and I'm like, yep. Make sure each trigger press is going straight back. Make sure I'm not cranking the gun with my firing hand. Clean that, load the gun back, and then it's back to autopilot. There's a few moments in the match where I'll have to do that, which is not ideal, but occasionally it's needed.
So do you have since you listen to Steve's podcast, is there like a focus phrase that you use?
At one point there was.
Okay.
I actually had this discussion the other day with my mentor. And it's like, when you get into the mental aspect of shooting, you can, I don't know if you've read any of Brian Enos's book, Beyond the Fundamentals. I'm pretty sure you have to have a, like IQ above 150 to sit there and read the book and just go page for page without going, what is going on here? Because like, drinking from a fire hose is what it feels like to me. Because I'm sitting there trying to digest it. I'm like, do I have a room temperature IQ or what's going on here? Um, but I'm sitting there reading Brian Enos's book, and there was something that came up in it that made sense. It's like, okay, let's go back and think about stages I shot exceptionally well. What was part of my process before the make ready that could have resulted in that performance? And I'm sitting there thinking on it, and I'm like, I didn't have a focus phrase. It's like that. There's nothing specific that I focused on that allowed me to shoot like that. As a matter of fact, it was like my mind was blank whenever I shot the stage and before I shot the stage. It's like, okay, but that doesn't work every time. And in Brian's book, he talks about how the difference between concentration and just being in a state of awareness. And it's like, if you are really concentrated on doing one thing, well, then that's one thing is what you're going to be focused on doing. So if something else goes wrong, you kind of have to sidetrack and then get back to it. Where it's like if you're in a state of awareness, it allows for you to adapt to what happens along the way. I mean, I haven't got that part figured out by any means. I'm pretty sure I would shoot a lot better if I did have that figured out. That's kind of what I'm trying to do now is figure out, okay, experiment in that match is be like, okay, what did I do here that was different? And I'll look at stages that I shoot in matches, and it's like, okay, I won this stage, and I won this stage by a huge margin. Why? It's like, what was different? Where was my mind? Because if I can do that once, surely I should be able to repeat it. And if I can repeat it over and over again, well, then that gets me a little bit closer to those guys that are at the top. And that's the part that's confusing for me at the moment. Yeah, still trying to figure that out for sure. I'll use an example from this LOCAP match that Blue Grass just put on. The first stage, I won the first stage, had overall win on it, and then I got beat on every stage after that. Going into the ninth stage, I got beat on it too, and I'm like, I had a moment where I kind of like retracted and pulled myself away. I'm like, what is going on here? I'm like, I am not shooting like myself. What's going on? I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, well, the problem is I am thinking way too much about it and maybe getting drawn into the stages too much, and who knows? But kind of took a moment to, where were we?
Okay, so you were saying that you won stage 1. You'd gotten beaten on the stages up until stage 9. You pulled yourself back, and then you went to speak to your coach or somebody?
No, not really. I kind of like just pulled away from the squad after stage 9. I got beaten on stage 9 like pretty badly as well. And I was like, all right, what's going on here? And I'm sitting there thinking on it. I'm like, maybe I just need to relax and just shoot, and just stop worrying so much about it and just believe that I can shoot the stages and be done with it. Well, after that, I kind of just relaxed, not really drawing my focus in on anything specifically, relaxed and shot the last 2 stages and won both of them. And went from losing the match to winning. I'm like, okay, why couldn't I have done that on the stages in between? So I'm sitting there looking at my overall finish, and I'm like, so where would I have been if I had just, uprooted my head from my ass and shot the rest of the stages? Like, it's very confusing when you sit back and think on it.
It seems like it would be easier. So that what I was saying when I was muted for the rest of the
no,
audience.
I could hear you.
I know you could, but I was muted for the recording. So what I was saying was that line between winning and losing those stages is very thin. But it seems at times easier to fall off of that line than it is to cross back over to the winning side. You were able to do it. Were you able to figure out what occurred?
I think that I was just like, I think I was getting too focused in a way, if that makes any sense at all. Like focusing on one thing for that stage. Once again, goes back into, did I have a focus phrase? No, not really, but I was trying to get super focused to shoot the stages and over confirming everything instead of just shooting. And of course, it could also be as simple as I just shot those stages better than my competitors. It could be that simple, or it could actually be that I had a mental blockage on them. It's hard to tell, and it's something that you kind of got to experiment around with to see. I do know I went from shooting god awful points in horrible times to dropping 2 Charlies across the field course. I'm like, what happened there? I mean, that's something I think on pretty often. It's like, all right, is this a mental thing? Am I overthinking that? And that's just really nothing specific. That I haven't got enough mileage to figure that part out yet.
I do feel like sometimes there's and Steve has mentioned this too. Once he's like, a lot of shooters, once they make the mistake and the pressure's off, and it's like, then they start shooting better. And I wonder if you were just, like you were saying, so focused in that you were trying so hard that once you let that go and you were just shooting, you crossed back over.
Yep. And that's very possible. And there's been times where that's made a lot of sense, where I shot a stage horribly, and then the stages after that I shoot great. There's one match where I actually passed up 4 targets and racked up them 4 FTSAs and 8 mics, and then shot every stage really well after that. Maybe I do need to take a Anderson class and some mental management to help me figure that part out.
Yeah, and he talks about that just on his podcast too. But there is one part where I don't want to say disagree with him, because he knows way more about this stuff than I do. But the part where I look at differently than him is, he says, people in that scenario I just described, like, they're expecting to make a mistake, and then when they do, they shoot fine because the mistake's over. I look at it as, what I have found is, if I go in there afraid to make a mistake, and then I do, and then because I'm so concerned about making the mistake that I make the mistake. It's kind of like staring at that no shoot, or like, don't hit the no shoot, and then you hit the no shoot, because that's what you're telling yourself. You know what I mean? So I look at it a little differently than he does. I feel like if I shoot scared, that I'm going to make the mistake. If I just go in there and shoot normal, I don't necessarily make the mistakes, and I shoot better.
It's the same concept of saying, don't think of the Eiffel Tower. Well, first thing that comes to your mind is the Eiffel Tower.
Eiffel Tower.
Yeah. So I've heard that one before as well. Like, looking at a stage that's got a bunch of no shoots on it. I've sat there and was like, well, I don't want to hit the no shoots. And someone says, what no shoots? Of course, I'm sitting there for a moment and not thinking that they're being sarcastic at all, and go, those right there. Well, I kind of get their point now. It's like, don't think of the no shoots. Think of the brown. Shoot the brown. Well, that makes more sense, I guess, in a way. And that's kind of how I look at penalty targets now. It's like, okay, shoot the brown. Not necessarily sitting there going, don't shoot the no shoot, because what's the first thing I'm going to do?
Shoot the no shoot.
Exactly. I'm going to drill 2 alpha in the center of the no shoot.
So I have a question for you then. Now we're talking about no shoots and stuff, because now we're talking about targets that, you have a minimal aiming area. And Steve preaches center of the available target area, which I totally agree with. Do you, because when you took Ben's class, he talked about looking at a spot and aiming at a spot. Do you do that for those partial targets as well in training?
I do. I kind of, at different distances, my focus is a little different. So another thing that he mentioned in his class, uh, I was we shoot stages in the middle of the class, and I was shooting center of the available target on a no shoot target that was at 7 yards. Well, I'm dropping two Charlie on it every time, and he said it's literally at seven, whatever it was, 7-10 yards. He said it's really close. He said you can drill two alpha on it all day. He said, do you think the top guys are taking two Charlie on it and going? Stopped and thought on it for a second, and I'm like, no, probably not. They're probably taking their two alpha on it and moving on. So I think there's a distance where you go from I'm getting two alpha on this target to 2 rounds in the center of the available target. I think you'd have to really sit down and math it out and figure out what your skill is and what your abilities are.
Right.
Because for me, if it's let's say inside of 12 yards, well, most targets I can typically get two alpha on inside that distance, unless it's a headshot. Sometimes I'm on the gun enough where I can say, okay, I'm putting 2 rounds in the head box, dead center of the credit card. Sometimes I can do that. Other times I may pull the gun out of the holster and feel like I'm holding it upside down, or just feels like a foreign object in my hand. Well, on those days I'm probably not going to be able to do that. In
So it
practice,
comes down
though,
to degree of difficulty for that target.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that makes
And
sense. And I can see at 7 yards. I mean, you could probably see every detail on the target, so it's easier, but 12 yards, you may not.
yeah, it's dependent on your vision as well. It's like you know, I may not be able to see it the A zone clearly at this distance, but someone else might be able to. Um, I kind of like play with it at like local matches, and I'll play with it in practice occasionally and figure out, okay, at this distance, where do I need to be aiming? What can I get away with? How many points can I get at this distance? What splits do I need to be shooting at this distance? That sort of thing.
Okay, and I've heard that. So you do kind of think about that type of thing. Now, do you think about that in a match or only in training?
Uh, I do it in my training so that I have that information for the match. Uh, I'll kind of like sit there and so let's say if I'm shooting doubles at 25 yards at my house, I'll play around and shoot at different speeds. That way I can say, okay, this is what I'm seeing with my sights, and this is the speed that I can see my sights in the center of the target each trigger press, right? And whenever I'm looking at a stage or something, I'll sit there and think, okay, I don't need to spend all day shooting this target. Like if it's a 25-yard open target, I probably don't need to be spending all day trying to shoot two alpha on that target, because chances are there's a lot of targets inside of 25 yards and I can pick my two alpha on, rack up my points on the close targets, and just shoot a 30 split at that 25-yard target and be done with it. That's 25 or 30. Ideally, shooting 20s doesn't always happen. It rarely happens. Um, I've seen people do it. They're a lot more baller than I am. Middle of the match, I try to prepare for the match enough in advance where I'm like, okay, I know what my abilities are. I know what my splits are. I know what my draw time is, my reloads. What can I get away with here? That's how I kind of approach the stages and different target arrays.
Now, does that affect your stage plan? Do you work your stage plan for those things or just what flows better for you?
Typically, I'll look and see what seems more efficient. I'll step it
Okay.
out, see which one has the most steps. And it's interesting on some stages, like the stage 9 at low cap, you had the option of taking a target at 25 yards. It was wide open target. You could take it at 25 yards, or you could add 6 or 7 steps to the stage and take it at 3.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, okay, can I move faster or shoot faster? Well, I go with shooting faster because I just didn't want to add the movement to it. Um, and another thing that I've heard at the same time, Shane Coley said it in the middle of a match: the closer I get, the better I get. So there's two different schools of thought there. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
do I close the distance and hammer out the points, or do I not add the distance and just shoot the stage? It's very dependent. Depends on what the movement is, what the layout of the stage is, how I'm feeling that day on the gun. You know, it may be as simple as looking, seeing what everyone else is doing, go, okay, if I choose a different stage plan than everyone else, I'm either a genius or an idiot. And there's no real in between.
Yeah.
It's like if you watch the Super Squad shooting stages, they're typically run the stage similar the same way. And once again, if you are running the stage different than everyone else, you probably fall under one of those two categories.
Now, I will say this. So last year I shot Carry Optics Nationals at CMP. Mm-hmm. So I made sure to shoot opposite of the Super Squad so I could watch both the men's and women's Super Squad. And there was one stage where everybody shot it one way except for two people, JJ and Max. And those two were both under, it was either 19 or 18 seconds. The only other one under 19 or 18, whatever it was Nils. So they did it a different way than everybody else. And I would have thought it was slower because at the start, you ran all the way to the left, shot, and then had to come all the way back. So like you had to backtrack, where the other one was like a circle. But come to find out that all the way to the left and back was actually faster because I saw Justine Williams shoot it all the way to the left and back too. And I'm like, man, I totally missed that. So on occasion, there is that weird, I kind of take JJ, well, you could almost take Max out of it too, but JJ for sure. I was like, okay, maybe it was just his speed, was just that much more. He's quick of foot. But, I saw Justine do it. I saw other people do it. And I'm like, okay, I missed that one. And so did most everybody else. So Nils was just so good. He was able to, keep up with Max, but JJ won the stage. And I want to say Max and Nils were less than 1/10 of a second from each other. So they ran almost the exact same time. And JJ was like 3/4 of a second faster.
And occasionally you run into that, and it's like,
yeah, you're not going to beat that. I mean, if he's just quicker. So I put that on just his, fleet of foot.
Yeah.
So
yeah, sometimes that's definitely a factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I want to back up for just a second. I got to ask you the national championship quiz. I forgot to ask you.
Uh-oh.
So how tall are you?
I'm 5'8".
5'8". Okay, so you are 4 feet 20. Did you grow up on a farm?
Not necessarily a farm. Just
property?
a 10-acre property in the middle of nowhere. So I've got a range in my backyard, but not a farm.
Okay, and were you homeschooled?
I was for a bit. I was homeschooled from 3rd grade to 8th grade.
So 2 out of 3, not bad. So what we found, oddly enough, just asking as a joke, we'd ask those questions, and we found that people that answered all 3 of those are high-level shooters. So, and it came as a joke because in 2020, when I went to Carry Optics Nationals, we watched the production Super Squad, and everybody seemed to be like 6'5". It's like, this is ridiculous. Well, no wonder they're always winning. It's crazy. And then, so we were like, we're going to start asking people. And then we're like, well, that's weird how it all just kind of panned out. It's not scientific at all, but it's just funny how it's coincidence. So,
yeah, it's like,
Yeah, very odd. Now, you mentioned earlier that there's like a core set of drills that you like to go back to. What are you, if you don't want to state what those drills are, what are you specifically rehashing or retesting?
A lot of it comes down to a lot of recoil control, timing the gun, accuracy within a certain, time limit. So I'll shoot dot drills, which for me it's like a 2-inch dot. You shoot it at 5, 6, and 7 yards, depending on where you are as a shooter. You have 5 seconds from the holster to shoot 6 rounds on one of those dots. I have probably shot more rounds on that drill than anything else, mostly because I couldn't pass it for the longest time because you're supposed to shoot 2 rows clean, cold. Beginning of your practice session, not dry firing, nothing. Set the target into the ground, start shooting. It took me a very long time to be able to clear that. I'll shoot bill drills at different distances, which I'm kind of like going more towards shooting doubles at different distances than bill drills after I took Stager's class. I'll shoot the accelerator drill, and I've done 2 different variations of it, one with the open targets at different distances and another one with a open target at like 7 yards, zebra at 15, and a head box at like 20 or 25. If I can clean that drill, I end up going into the match pretty confident. If I can shoot a 25-yard head box on command, I feel okay about my shooting. I'll shoot the Bianchi plate rack drill fairly often.
Interesting. Do you shoot Bianchi at all? Okay.
No,
you just shoot the plate drill. Okay.
Yep. It was introduced to me, and I started seeing the value in it because it's like if I shoot that drill and I can go 48 for 48 on it, whenever I go into that next match, I typically find myself shooting steel way better. And it could just be a mental thing, but it seems to work, so I don't argue with it.
I would say it's a confidence thing, so I would say it's a mental thing, yeah.
Yeah. And it's also figuring out what the trigger press needs to feel like and what the sight picture needs to look like at different distances on, 8-inch plates. Because we see mini poppers at distance all the time. And with the accelerator drill, we'll see options to take hardcover targets at different distances. So that's why I'll shoot it occasionally with the zebra and the head box target. That way, whenever I see that target array in a match, I'm not wigging out.
Right.
So it's like if you've been shooting head boxes at 25 yards and you see one at 10, you're like, oh, that's cute.
Yeah. I can run by this one.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I'll just, crank 2 off at that one and call it a day. I mean, there's been instances where that hasn't been the case, but for the most part, it does help. I'll shoot some of the, I got it from watching Shane Coley's videos. It's a transition drill of his where it's like, he does it with a plate rack, I think, and 2 open targets. They're just drawing, shooting open target, small piece of steel, back to another open target. Because I have a tendency to either throw points on the cardboard or just completely send around off to the side of the steel. And that gets me, go stop kind of thing, where it's like, all right, rip 2 at 7 yards on an open target. Now stop and shoot a plate at, 18 yards. Stop, press the trigger, shoot again. I would be shooting a lot more different drills if I had a flat range, because mine's kind of like sitting on a hill. But if I just had like a bay to shoot in and some more props like barrels, I would definitely be shooting stuff like Track the A Zone from Stager. And a lot of his different drills I would be using. It's just a little difficult to set up whenever you ain't got any barrels shooting on an incline. It gets a little bit more difficult.
Now, the picture with the STG 44, You work at that range?
Yes, sir.
So do you ever get the opportunity to after hours practice?
No. Yeah. Pretty much at 7, 8 o'clock, whenever they close, depending on the day. Doors are closed down. Everyone's going home. Uh, and that range has a rule with no holster drawing, even for me.
Even for
So it's
employees,
like,
huh?
yeah.
Wow.
So it's like, well, can't practice here. Not the stuff I need to, at least. I could do table starts and practice it, but I'm not
Okay.
sure how the owner would feel about me using the range, even on an off day. Going in there and be like, hey, I'm using this range, so if y'all get filled up over there, too bad. I would have to rent the range or something.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So other
I've got a membership to a range now. It's a 30-40 minute drive from my house, and I had the membership previously. And what I'd do is if I need to shoot box drills or something, I'd go there and do it because you got 100-yard range with 2 or 3 pistol bays. I can run a pretty wide variety of drills on that. So I plan on getting me some more props, loading them into a truck, and driving out there and setting up more drills. But
okay. Yeah, for a little more
yeah,
complicated setup.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, that's not too bad. That's quite a few drills too. Now, what does your normal dry fire look like? And what I mean, I'm not saying specifically what do you do from the time you start to the time you end, but like how often, are that type of thing.
Uh, so it really depends on like how many matches I'll be shooting or anything like that. It's not something I do every single day. If I'm getting ready to shoot a big match, I start doing it quite a bit more frequently. The big issue is I have this spot on my hand that I have yet to figure out. It hasn't calloused over or anything. It's just a sore.
Hmm.
And it just so happens to be right where the trigger guard sits on my support hand. So whenever I start dry firing a lot, I start irritating that
Aggravating it.
spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've tried Coban on it, lifting tape, duct tape. Duct tape actually works the best because it doesn't get beat up by the metal trigger guard. Um, I try wrapping it. Wrapping it helps for a bit, but after a certain amount of dry fire and even live fire, it starts irritating it. And what I find is whenever I get it to swell up a little bit and then draw the gun, it gets to where it's a pain holding the gun. And it's like,
It's
I start
distracting.
hesitating more often. Yeah, I start
Yeah.
hesitating more. So after I developed it, like uh, draw time slowed down just a bit, mostly because after I draw the gun, I'm like hesitating a little bit, getting my support hand onto it because I used to smack my hand to the gun. Uh, I developed it while I was shooting the Glock, and it lines up perfectly with the double undercut. I don't
Okay.
know how. Don't know how it happened. I went to doctors and they look at it and they're like, "Well, we could freeze it off." And I'm like, "Is that going to do anything? Is it going to redevelop?" They just haven't told me anything specific because they don't really have an answer for it. I'd say I'm probably the only person coming into them and little
Right.
Grayson County going, "Hey, I developed this likely from shooting. Can you help me with it?" Um, I've asked other people about it. I'm like, have you seen anything like this? And they're like, no, I haven't had it before. I even mentioned it to Niels, and he's like, well, that's weird. I'm like, okay, if Niels is telling me this is weird, it's probably weird. Uh, I've ran into a few other people that have it. I think that it ultimately comes down to having the hands of a young woman. I mean, that's what it seems like. Of course, I do have eczema, so I get really dried out skin. And,
Mm.
sometimes the skin on my hands acts a little weird. But I've had that for almost 2 years now. Doesn't go away. So
I
I
wonder
found
if
if
a
I dry fire a lot, it
dermatologist might
works.
be able to help you.
I plan on going to a dermatologist to get them to check it out. Every time I get ready to do it, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what I'll do about it. Uh,
Doesn't
I had
hurt
a
though, you know.
no, I had a sergeant came into the range, and he kind of glanced at it. He noticed it on my hand. He looked at it and he goes, "Well, that needs to be lanced." I was like, "I think I'd like to go to a dermatologist before I make that
I
decision."
want a second opinion.
Yeah, it's like here's my pocket knife. Go ahead and just cut it out. I mean, but yeah, that kind of affects how much I dry fire occasionally. And I sound like a pansy for saying that, but it's like if I get really bad right before a match, it irritates me. Um, I if I'm getting ready for a match though, I'll either go to dry firing every day or every other day. Um, Mostly, I stopped working on par times as often and started working more on consistency. Like, okay, instead of
Okay.
working on doing a 90 reload every time, I'm working on hitting my reload every single time. And that seems to be a little more important in the middle of a stage than
Yes.
anything. Uh, like whenever I was wanting to make GM, a 90 draw, 90 reload was awesome. That was perfect. I worked on that all the time. Do it, trying to work on my power times, getting my draw time down really low. But now it's mostly me trying to do everything consistently, get a consistent grip on my draw. Still haven't figured the scoop draw out. It's definitely faster, but the amount of times I go to do it and I end up with the gun in my hand like this
Right.
pretty often. Or even better yet, I end up holding the back of the beaver tail. Uh, yeah,
That's
I
no
know.
better.
No, it's not. It's not at all. It's a little bit worse, maybe. Um,
Isaac Lockwood has
hey,
that thing down to an absolute T.
oh yeah, yeah. There's some guys out there that I mean, they just nail it. Uh,
Right.
and I started working on it after I was shooting Florida Open, and I heard Sal Luna go, you know, scoop draw's the way. That's the only way to do it. And I'm watching him, and he's like, yeah, he's doing the scoop draw every single time, every stage. Doesn't matter the target. He's scoop drawing it.
Wow.
And I'm like, how do I learn this ability? And I start working on it, and I always get caught up on the beaver tail or something. And occasionally, if I've dry fired a bunch, I can hit it. But as soon as the buzzer goes off, I end up going back to just going over top of the gun. Uh, so I've kind of just accepted I might be losing a little bit of time on the draw. Um, Now, if I go out and shoot a practice session and I look at my draw time, and I'm like a 120 to a 7 yard target. That's bad for me. Then I'll go back to working on par times in my dry fire, or I'll sit there on the range and unload the gun, go down to an 80 on the par timer, or sometimes even a 60, and sit there and dry fire that for a good 5-10 minutes, then load the gun back and go back to shooting. Um, if I notice a big issue in my dry, like my live fire, I'll go back to dry fire, resolve the issue, and then
Okay.
go back to the live fire. Um, Work on transitions pretty often. Um, Honestly, whenever I work on transitions anymore, pretty much it's me coming into my room and going, huh, this would be a good time to work on transitions for like 5 minutes. Take 5 minutes, just move the gun around, stop it in the middle of targets, and then just lay the gun back down and go back to doing whatever it is I'm doing throughout the day. It's not necessarily a dedicated dry fire session. It's like walk into my room, my gun's laying there, and I have targets on the wall. I would be an idiot to pass this opportunity up.
There you go. You were ninth last year at Production Nationals, as we talked earlier. Have you worked on anything specific in order to improve upon what you did at last year's Nationals?
Pretty much what I've worked on the most is being more aggressive in not only my shooting but my moving as well throughout stages, because I have a tendency to be 2 and 3 seconds behind everyone else on stages. Everyone that's in the top 10, I'll be way behind them. And it's like, okay, well, why is that? Well, I just get very passive about it, and relax in my shooting, start shooting slower and then moving slower. Well, you're watching the guys that are on the super squad, they're not doing that. They're aggressively moving through the stages. Uh, and that's something that I have to shoot a lot of matches to work on. Um, that's the biggest thing I've hit. Everything else is like, okay, I know what drills I need to be doing to shoot with everyone else. Um, my my live fire has gotten a little bit more difficult as far as shooting plates at further distances, partial targets at further distances. Instead of shooting no shoots at 20 yards, I'm shooting at 30 or 35, that sort of thing. I don't really get to practice swingers very often, but more of harder target arrays. I work on shooting those and shooting them a little bit more aggressively instead of standing there on top of them all day to get 2 perfect shots off. I have a tendency to slow down whenever I see open targets at distance as well, trying to work on that. And then just with my movement in general, picking a spot that I need to move to and sprinting to it instead of just casually running to it.
Okay, so it sounds like you're doing a lot more of the non-shooting stuff to minimize that time.
A lot of it's the non-shooting stuff, and a lot of it's the non-shooting stuff, but also just different details of the actual shooting itself, like picking spots on targets, the visual stuff, not shooting 30 splits at a 18-yard open target, because I have that tendency as well, or having to post up to shoot everything instead of taking some targets on the move that I can take, stuff like that.
Okay.
Just trying to do harder stuff instead of always going out there and doing the same practice session, shooting build drills and Blake drills, stuff like that at 7 yards, trying to push the targets out further, make the targets a little bit more difficult, that sort of thing.
Okay. Now, what does your make ready look like?
Too long.
Okay.
I hear that all the time. It's like I'm sitting there and I sit there and I'll go through the stage at least one more time in my head. Grab my start mag, load it in the gun. I have a habit of, once I've loaded the gun, I eject the magazine, push the bullet, the top round back into the mag, because it's, after you load it, it's always pushed out a little bit. I'll push it back in the mag. Not that that does anything at all. It's just something I've started doing, and it just hasn't changed. And then I will press check the gun that started shooting a Glock, and then I let the hammer down. Reality, I should be letting the hammer down after I press checked it. Anyway, once I holster the gun, I typically will not pull it back out again. I've seen people take loaded sight pictures. I just don't do it. I'll sit there until I feel either relaxed or just ready. I'll kind of like sit there for a moment, go through the stage. If there's something in my visualization of the stage where it's like, that wasn't right, I'll go all the way back to the beginning of it and do it again until I can sit there and see it like a video playing in my head of, okay, this is that target array, this is how I'm taking that, this is where I'm doing the reload. And I'll sit there until I've got that figured out. Once again, it takes way too long. And then once I sit there to myself and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to shoot, I'll take my hand off the gun and shoot the stage. Something I picked up from, I think it was Rob Epifani that I heard it from. Whenever I'm working on trying to shoot more aggressively on the stage, I'll sit there and I'm taking like quick breaths, as if I was, getting ready to lift some heavy weight, trying to get my heart rate up. That way, that heart rate's through the roof or something. Sometimes that's better for me, because otherwise I start looking like I'm driving Miss Daisy through a stage, just casually shooting stuff instead of aggressively moving through the stage. Yes. Oh, yeah. Big fan. My problem is I use way too much of it. Way too much of it. I joked with someone the other day. I was like, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a scoop of pre-workout
There you go.
like 15 minutes before I have to shoot a stage. I'm like, that sounds like a great idea. And of course, you got people that look at me, they're like, you're insane. Of course, I'll say this on the range at work because no one there hardly shoots any practical shooting sport. So
Mm,
they're still the ones at the 10-yard line. They're like, make sure you got a slow trigger
right.
squeeze with your handgun at 10 yards and make sure you take your deep breaths before you shoot. And I'm sitting there going, I'll take the Ghost energy drinks and I'll drink like half of that before I shoot a stage that has a 30-yard steel target on it. And they're like, you're lying. I'm like, am I? You'll never know. I know I'm not, but you'll never know.
Right.
Maybe one day I'll just take a scoop of pre-workout at a local match and see what happens.
There you go. I drink caffeine all match long because I want
Yep.
to, I want to be alert, ready to go at all times. So I'll drink coffee in the morning and
I
then
have
I
to do the same
follow it up
thing.
with Bang energy drinks the rest of the day.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I try to watch my caffeine intake just a bit because I have a tendency to go way overboard with it.
You're young.
Uh, I, yeah. I, there was at one point where it was like 900 milligrams of caffeine a day sounds like a perfect intake level. No, apparently not. You know, I try to cut it down to about 300 or 400 milligrams a day. That seems a little low to me.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't sound healthy at all.
Yeah,
That's too low. I mean,
yeah,
it's a
for
food
sure.
group.
Yeah, exactly. It is a food group. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure you have to get your daily value and then
Look, I'm a
some.
paramedic. I know these things.
Yeah, there we
So
go.
yeah, it's science.
It is. I was telling my doctor what I was doing, and he's like, maybe you need to cut back a little bit. And I'm like,
You're
it's
young.
fine. Take my pre-workout at 7 o'clock whenever I get off work, and wonder why my sleep schedule's messed up.
That workout's good though.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. I took some pre-workout once that was 450 milligrams a serving. I took the
Wow.
full serving at 8 o'clock. Horrible idea.
Did you run a marathon?
uh, I did a lot in that day because
Yeah, I bet.
I worked out in the gym for probably right at 2 hours. After I got done lifting, I was like, let's go to the treadmill, for a bit. I was like, we should probably go home. Drive home. Lay in bed until 2 a.m. in the morning, staring at the ceiling. And I'm like, I am an idiot for sure. Yeah, not the greatest idea I've ever had. I'm definitely not a genius in that aspect.
But you're not dumb because have you done it since?
No,
Oh,
I haven't done that
well,
since.
there you go. All right. You only do things once, and that's how we learn. So,
Yeah, this is true.
yeah, no big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Now, my last question that I had for you is what is your ultimate goal in practical shooting?
Right now, I'm pretty much just seeing what I can accomplish. And, I would like to get a top five finish at the Nationals within the next, 2 years. I would like to be able to accomplish that. Um, I would like to be able to get within 5% of the guys like Hetherington and Niels. Um, Maybe in the future be able to win the Nationals, but trying to do realistic goal setting within,
Okay.
different time periods. Because, like, okay, if I'm working 40 hours a week at a gun store, but those 40 hours are throughout the day from 10 to 7, what's my realistic window of opportunity for training? And, off of my pay, how many rounds am I able to shoot? That sort of thing.
Yeah, life
It's like,
factors into all of that.
correct. It's like, okay, at this rate, where am I going to be? That's kind of what I try to look at. So I try to keep it realistic. That way I'm not going to nationals going, I'm going to win nationals this year. Meanwhile, you got, the top five guys, I would say, are like that. The year starts and they're like, I'm going to win this match. and that's what their time is focused on doing. Also have to factor in the mileage that they have. It's like, okay, I don't have the mileage that Niels has, and I
Not
can't
even
just
close.
muster it up. Yeah, I can't just muster that up. Uh, it becomes, how close can I get to him this year? Can I get 5% closer than I was last year?
1%'s an improvement.
It is.
Yeah.
1% is, in fact, an improvement, especially whenever, once again, taking consideration that he's probably getting better as time goes on. I mean, I think it was 2020. I don't think he had the best finish at Nationals, and I think I talked to him after that one, and he'd had a list of things he was going to work on, and then wins it the next year, and then decides that I'm just going to win everything
The year
last
after.
year. I do
Yeah.
believe. Yeah, I think
Four.
he's just like, you know what? I'm going to decide I'm just going to win whatever nationals I can win. I was like, oh my god. I mean, if that's not proof of someone getting better, even at his level, it's like, okay, he's still got room to grow.
And he is
Uh,
still actively working on his mental game.
yeah,
Crazy. Because
yes,
you wouldn't think that
it's
someone who
insane.
wins 4 national championships in one season would need to work on his mental game. But he knows what his weaknesses are, air quotes. But and that's obviously not a weakness. But if he feels he can make it better, that's a scary thought. That's like Eric Graffel saying, "Oh, I can get better. Get out of here."
Exactly. It's like, oh my god,
Yeah.
how far behind am I? Yeah, I mean, it's insane. And I really enjoy watching those guys shoot and even just talking to them. It's like, I mean, they're just another person like us, but at the same time, it's like he's got something figured out that I haven't got.
Absolutely. It's
Uh,
not necessarily the physical aspects of the game, but the mental aspects and putting it to use during the competition. There's something else going on there. I mean,
for
he has
sure.
synapses firing that I don't somewhere.
Yeah, that like there's something going on in his head that I don't know how to articulate or think about in the manner that he does. I
Right.
mean, there's for sure mental aspects that the guys like that have that those of us that are haven't quite got to that level for sure haven't figured out yet. Uh, and some of it can also be like the physical skill as well. Uh, like I'm
Sure.
not going to be the arrogant guy, and I'm sure you've ran into guys like this that are like, "Well, I can shoot just as well as he can." No, no, I cannot. I've heard that one a few times on the range in general, whether it be at work or on an actual practical shooting range. You hear someone look at a shooter that's way better than them, they're like, "Well, I can shoot just as well as they can." No, the answer is probably you cannot shoot just as well as they can. They have put work in that you don't see to be able to do the things that they do. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm pretty realistic in knowing I'm not as good of a shooter as these guys are because you're watching them shoot and you're like, yeah, I can't do that yet. I'm not at that level yet. Uh, but it doesn't mean I'm going to sit back and be like, well, I just can't do it. And I'm going to sit there and be like, how can I learn how to do this?
Yeah. And it may come down to they just have more time to put in than you do. There are so many different factors, but the bottom line is they are like those guys who think they can shoot as well as them. They're not putting in the time that those guys are dedicating to their sport.
Exactly. Even with me, it's like, yeah, I spend my time dry firing. I try to hit the range occasionally. I mean, I'm not shooting every week. At one point, I was shooting every week, but with my job, it's like, okay, not only do I not have the time to shoot every week, which I could probably make the time, it's what's my financial status here? Yeah, no,
Yes.
we're not buying a box of primers at $120 a thousand. Could there be more I could do? For sure. I mean, I could be the guy that wakes up at 6 o'clock in the morning so that I can get some dry fire in and then load up 50 rounds and go out and shoot the plate rack. I've done this before, leading up to a major match where I'm like, okay, I need to be on the gun. These are the things that I need to work on. I'm willing to sacrifice some sleep or sacrifice some time where I'm out doing whatever. Sacrifice that time to go to the range or dry fire, or sacrifice money that could be used for, a fancy meal occasionally or whatever it might be, to go out to the range, burn some ammo, and try to make some progress. But it's not something that I'm going to, well, haven't gotten there yet where I'm like, okay, I'm going to eat ramen noodle every single day and start driving a smart car to work or a moped so that I can afford every single round that I can shoot gun range. But there's guys out there that are like that. I mean, they
There
do
are.
exist.
Yeah.
And it's like talking to Stager, it sounds like at one point that was him. He's like,
Yep. I would agree.
whatever I can do to put it in. It's like, I kind of get it. I understand why. But it's also a thing of, I'm trying to still yet enjoy, my off time as well. Deciding whether you want the balance of what do I got to do to win the Nationals within the next year or so, to how much do I want to have a normal life, which I think at a certain level, that's just not even an option. It's like, okay, all of your time must now be soaked into this, and your resources and your finances are going to be soaked into this. There's times where it's like, yes, that's where I'm at. That's where I want to be at. And that's whenever they're like, okay, let's start meal prepping so that I can afford more ammo. That's when that starts taking place. And something that happened whenever I wanted to make GM, it's like, okay, I'm not going to visit my friends because I need to be on the range. I need to be shooting matches, that sort of thing. That's happened. Um, Once you set your goal of this is what I want to do, that's when you start making those trade offs.
Now, do you teach?
I do through the store a decent amount,
Okay.
and I do a little bit on the side privately. It's nothing to write home about because there's not too many people in this area that are like, hey, I want to, get training with like me specifically, because by appearance, I don't look like someone that the average shooter goes to. I look like a accountant or cashier at Walmart or something. I definitely don't look like a guy that's shooting at all. And I've heard that a lot in the store and stuff. I used to work with a guy who was tatted up, former military. Everyone was going to him for classes and stuff, but he was, D class shooter.
Mm.
So it's like,
But he looked the
yeah,
part.
he looked the part. That's what I run into a lot here is like people want to take classes from that. Someone that's got, some sort of military resume, that sort of thing. But then you'll run into the guys that are like, okay, I understand what a USPSA Grandmaster is, and now I want to take a class. I've had people that, I'm sitting there talking to them. Typically, that's not something I bring up in a conversation where I'm like, oh, by the way, I'm a USPSA Grandmaster. The only time I'll do that is whenever I'm listening to someone in the store actively talking about competitive shooting. And even then, typically I won't say a whole lot, but it's whenever they start bragging to other people and trying to like
Mm.
belittle them a little bit because they're a competitive shooter. I'm like, hey, how's it going? Pull up the USPSA membership card and go, by the way, in front of them. That moment has happened before, but I'll have people that I'm talking to. They ask me my name. I tell them. They go home and get curious and start doing research, a quick Google search or something like that. And they either, run into my YouTube account or Instagram. They run into something, and then they'll come in a few days later and go, hey, got a few questions for you. That's happened
Mm.
before.
Okay. Start asking for recommendations
Yeah, they
on
start either
stuff.
asking for recommendations or start asking if I teach classes and stuff,
Right.
which I would be an idiot to sit there and go, no, I won't turn down extra money.
It helps with shooting matches.
It,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like, okay, if I make money off teaching a class to someone like a one-on-one or something, that can go directly to me getting primers or me getting bullets, paying for new equipment, gas to
Hotel room,
matches. That's
gas. Yep.
it,
Entry
exactly.
fees. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
All of the above.
And yeah, for sure. I have an agreement with the store where it's like, okay, now that I see that there's some people in this area that would be interested in that, can I start advertising it in your store? They agree with it, so I'm like, all right, so I'm gonna get some business cards made. I had some business cards made. I'll sit them out there at the range counter, and occasionally someone will pick them up and contact and be like, hey, can I get some training with you? Sure, but first, come out to the range and let me see you shoot at least once first, or let
Right.
get to know the person before you go do a one-on-one class with them. That sort of thing. Whenever it comes to teaching, it's not something that I'm fully devoted to, but I do recognize that there's money to be made there and there's a need for it. Because in this area, if you want training, your options come down to what seems to be the average NRA firearms instructor that is preaching the slow trigger squeeze at 7 yards
Right.
and hard sight focus.
Yeah. Bullseye shooting.
Yeah. Or the push pull method and vice gripping the gun. And what's some other good ones I've heard? Making sure your stance is perfect for every shot. And
Oh,
I've had that.
boy.
Oh yeah. I'm like, man, I wonder if that's the reality in like, a self defense situation where you can just be like, you know what? Hold on. Let me make sure my stance is right.
Let me get my base.
Let me make sure my stance is right. Yeah. Yeah. And after I've drawn my gun, hold on. Let me press the trigger through real slowly. So don't run at me yet. Let me start pressing the trigger first. After I explained that to a few people that they came in one the basic pistol class. Of course, my idea of basic firearms instruction and the store's idea is a little bit different. For them, it's like this end to the target, this end towards your face. Don't point this end at your face. That's basic instruction. For me, it's like, here is how you shoot acceptable hits at 7 yards, but also at 15, 20. That sort of thing. Let's get you operating the gun properly and understanding that you don't have to have a slow trigger squeeze with every round. I have people that come in and take that have learned how to shoot from, their uncle that was military or their local NRA firearms instructor, that sort of thing. I'm sitting there watching them shoot, and I notice that they're doing this for every shot. And the target's 5 yards away, 5 to 7 yards. They're doing this. That's when I'm kind of like, hey, let's grip the gun and just smash through the trigger. And of course, they look at me like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, let's get an idea here. If someone's running at you with a knife or, just came in through your window at your house, are you going to sit there and press the trigger the same way, or are you going to smash through it? I guess I'll be pressing the trigger a little bit faster. I'm like,
Yeah. Probably
correct.
a whole lot. I would hope anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, because you need that gun to go off now, not 2 seconds from now. This moment is when you need the gun to go off. And then you see them, they'll press the trigger, and then they look, and they bring the gun back up and shoot, and look. Here's another idea. Let's practice on shooting multiple rounds and not looking at the target. And of course, once again, they look at me and go, what are you talking about? Well, are you going to shoot one round and look at the guy and go, well, he's not on the ground yet. Shoot again, look at him, go, no. Same concept. It's not that I'm sitting there trying to teach them defensive shooting or anything. It's trying to get the concept across that, hey, being able to operate a gun at speed is a good idea all around, instead of trying to bullseye shoot a pistol. There's a place for the bullseye shooting as well, and the slow pressing of the trigger, but the average person that gets a concealed carry permit really needing that skill as much as being able to pull the gun out of the holster and put accurate rounds on a target in a rapid succession.
Yep. Minimal amount of time.
Yeah. getting that idea across that it may not be one round that you need. It may be multiple rounds. Let's get used to shooting multiple rounds instead of shooting one, looking at the target, maintaining our grip for those multiple rounds. And I love whenever they'll come in and go, "So, do you teach defensive pistol shooting classes?" And I go, "No, I teach pistol shooting classes. Period." Look at me weird again. I like the quote from Brian Enos in his book where he mentions, I'm not going to mention the use of shooting in a defensive matter throughout this entire book. The only thing I will say is, if I had to save someone from drowning, I would much rather be an Olympic swimmer. Probably going to approach shooting in the same manner.
Yeah, that's a strong swimmer.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I would much rather be a really good shooter if the gun ever comes out of my holster than I've shot my pistol once in a year.
Right. And very slow at 5 yards.
Exactly. Of course, then they get wrapped up in the idea of, well, we need a defensive pistol shooting class. And I'm like, what is your defensive pistol shooting class teaching you? Because if they're teaching you shooting slowly at 5 yards, is it really defensive? It sounds like to me they're just like, that's a nice check you got there. I'm going to go cash it. Now let's give you some
functional
information that
training.
seems useful. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I get annoyed by that whenever it comes through the store. I probably shouldn't get annoyed by it, but it does annoy me. Another one I had recently was someone came in and they was asking me about shooting a pistol match. And they said, we're going to come in and shoot the match, but first I need to go practice some more before I come in here and shoot this thing. And I went, that's not how you do it. And they looked at me like, what do you know? I said, you come in, you shoot the match to see where you're at, and it's an honest assessment. You take the test and see what you need to work on. I said, you don't go, well, let me go practice before I go shoot this local match, because no one's going to win the bass boat here. Come shoot the match, take your notes on what you need to practice on, and then go back and practice it. They stopped me and they said, I should stop you there and let you know I am an NRA instructor. I went, that's cool. Don't care. Does not matter. That the timer over here does not care what your certifications are. It doesn't care what your classification is.
No.
Hit factor doesn't care. Shoot the stage, shoot the match, use it as an assessment. Once again, it's like, okay, if you have to get in a self-defense situation, are you going to say, hold on, I haven't practiced. We can't do this right now. Maybe stay at a proficient level with your carry gear and shooting in general so that you're not that person that's, once again, afraid of shooting a pistol match. They're not shooting back. I mean,
right.
It's like, I hope to God that never happens, but maybe induce some stress in your shooting to begin with. I guarantee that's a whole lot more stressful than all of your friends watching you, and the worst thing that happens is they laugh at you for the next 2 or 3 weeks about you drilling 6 rounds into a no-shoot.
You don't know what you don't know until you do it.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I agree with that.
It's very interesting seeing what comes through the door. I'm like, maybe just learn how to shoot the gun. I mean, there's people that teach the tactics, that teach the actual defensive stuff that's legit. Go to those guys for that, but learn how to shoot the pistol. Don't get wrapped up into, well, this is a defensive class. All this stuff is just for competition. It's like, this is just operating the gun. It's basic stuff. Here's
it all flows together.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like, learn that and then go, take it your own direction. Like if you're a competitive shooter, go take a movement class to learn more efficiency, mental management, something like that. But if you're law enforcement, military, go to the guys that teach the tactics, the room clearing and stuff like that. But learn how to shoot your stuff.
Well, it's funny you say that because I learned to shoot I learned to shoot before I went in the military, but I shot very little pistol, maybe none at all actually before I joined the military, and everything was NRA style bullseye shooting that I shot. And now I see, I got out almost 30 years ago. And now I see where those Marines are now running USPSA style courses on active duty. And I'm like, that's exactly what we should have been doing back then, because it applies much more towards defensive use of a gun than me standing there waiting for the target to turn, fire 5 shots in 25 seconds at a bullseye, or slow fire at a bullseye target at 25 yards. You know, that moving and shooting and getting accurate hits on target in minimal time, all of that is so much more applicable.
And
So
that's what I hear a lot of from not only guys that come through the store, but soldiers and Marines that we shoot with that are in those combat MOS jobs or have been overseas. They're like, you know, this is why I shoot competitively. And it's like, so you're saying it does apply to your job? They're like, yes. Okay, well, that makes sense. And there's a guy locally, he's a Marine, and he goes over and shoots the, what is it, the Marine Corps Marksmanship Challenge. Does that sound right?
okay, and maybe I mean, like I said, I got out in '94, so, and I spent almost 10 years
Gotcha.
in it, so it's been a day or two.
Yeah, a little while.
But it does sound somewhat familiar, yeah.
Yeah, he said that they're doing their scoring on what they're calling lethality factor, something to that effect, and it's, you know, it's points divided by time.
That sounds really familiar.
It's like, man, that sounds interesting. It's like, okay, the point system's probably completely different, but it's like, okay, I understand the concept now. I see what y'all are doing. I'm like, that's cool. He's like, yeah, I go out and shoot the competitions. He said, and it's looking very much like USPSA style stages and 3-gun style stages, it's that sort of thing. I'm like, that's awesome. So it looks like that it's going that direction for those guys.
Well, Brennan, that's what I have. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we close this thing out?
I think we're good.
Man, it's been a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. Until next time.
Don't be a little bitch.
Yeah.